The Church at Home is a program highlighting topics that affect the church in the modern world, here in the Diocese of Youngstown and beyond. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Church at Home. I'm Father Jim Korda. Today we're going to talk with the Presbyterian community. And joining me in today's show is Pastor Nick Mager, who is the pastor of First Presbyterian Church in downtown Youngstown. And Pastor Nick, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Father Jim, it's nice to be here with you.
When we talk about the Presbyterian community, first of all, explain the word Presbyterian for us.
Good question. Well, Presbyterian defines us as a church that's governed by elders. The word Presbyterian comes from the Greek word presbyteros, which means elder. And so the thing that really ultimately distinguishes us is the way we govern ourselves.
We'll talk a little bit more about the whole governance issue a little later on.
Good.
But if we could talk about the beginnings of the Presbyterian community, and if you can go back to John Calvin and John Knox.
Okay, good. Well, those are sort of our faith ancestors, as you would say, fathers of Presbyterianism. John Calvin in Switzerland, and Calvin, of course, was raised Roman Catholic, but decided to depart from the Catholic Church. And Calvin was actually trained as a lawyer. And so sometimes we joke in the Presbyterian Church that we do things decently and in order, because Calvin was an attorney, a lawyer, and so he liked things orderly. John Knox was, of course, in Scotland, and John Knox was the father of Presbyterianism in Scotland, and stood up against the Catholic Church there and was determined to be independent of the Catholic Church there. So.
When did it actually come to the United States? When did Presbyterianism begin there, and what was those early beginnings like?
Yeah. Well, of course, some of the earliest settlers that came to this country had Presbyterian background. We Presbyterians are proud to say that John Witherspoon, who came as the president of Princeton University, was a Presbyterian minister and one of the first Presbyterians to sign the Declaration of Independence. So he's sort of the father of American Presbyterianism. Francis McCamey was another early Presbyterian to come to this country from Ireland. And Francis McCamey was, again, sort of up in the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland area. So those were two of the sort of early fathers of Presbyterianism in this country.
When I think of the Presbyterian community, a few phrases come into my mind. The one is the sovereignty of God. Another is the authority of Scripture, and the word grace.
Yeah, great.
And those are very influential and very powerful thoughts and virtues, or whatever. I'm not finding the right word to use.
That's right.
Can you explain some of those?
Well, you mean in 2 minutes or less?
Yeah. You as long as you want.
Good. Well, again, you're absolutely right. Presbyterians in what we refer to the Reformed tradition would hold very clearly to the sovereignty of God, that ultimately God is sovereign over all things. Some people take that to such an extent that they think God actually orders and manipulates events. Most Presbyterians don't believe that, but they have this sense of ultimate trust that God is in control and ultimately God will win. So, in terms of being saved by grace through faith, which again is sort of one of the hallmarks of the Protestant Reformation. I had a good friend who was a Lutheran pastor, and we did a study some years ago, and we sort of agreed, well, Presbyterians and Lutherans, both in the Reformed tradition, both believe that we are saved by grace through faith. We just put the emphasis in a different place. Lutherans say we're saved by grace through faith. Presbyterians say we're saved by grace through faith. So we tend to put more emphasis again on God's initiative, and our response, of course, is important. You also, mentioned the authority of Scriptures. Again, one of the hallmarks of the sort of the Reformed tradition, to say that we believe that ultimately the Scriptures are the final authority for faith and life. But I can assure you, we Presbyterians don't always agree on what the Scriptures say. So we get into lots of discussions and debates, but we always try to come back to the Scriptures and sort of substantiate or justify our position based on Scriptures.
We do know that you're part of the World Council of Churches. Can you explain, first of all, that structure and then the association of the Presbyterian Church within that structure?
Yeah, Jim, frankly, I'm not a great authority on the structure and when it really began, but I do know that Presbyterians historically have always been deeply ecumenical. As a matter of fact, something that characterized John Calvin's whole view of the church. John Calvin, I think, would be deeply saddened by all the divisions that take place in the church. And of course, we always like to think about those reformers as originally not really wanting to start a new church, but trying to simply reform the church that was there. But again, history sort of reminds us that even the best intentions are not necessarily always possible. But the Presbyterian Church has historically been involved in the World Council of Churches, again, trying to suggest that ecumenicity is really a part of the nature of the church as Christ intended it. So, yeah.
We had mentioned earlier about the structure, and you had talked about the elders.
Right.
Can you talk specifically about the structure of the Presbyterian Church, and also if you could bring it to the level within the church, the local parish itself?
Right. Again, I said earlier that the Presbyterian Church is Presbyterian based on the word presbyteros for elders. And in the Presbyterian Church, we have sort of two categories of elders. We have elders that are called ruling elders and elders that are teaching elders. I happen to be a teaching elder. Pastors are called teaching elders. And one of the things that Presbyterians are really committed to doing is trying to make sure that our governing bodies or councils of the church are balanced between ruling elders and teaching elders. In a local church, in my church, for instance, we have a session made up of 12 ruling elders and myself as the moderator. But we are a part of a presbytery, and I think a little later you're going to be talking to our general presbyter. In our presbytery, the presbytery is made up of representatives from churches in the presbytery and the ministers in the presbytery. So we have an equal balance of ruling elders and teaching elders in the presbytery, and they oversee the local congregations. Sometimes we like to say our presbytery is like our bishop, okay? And then the next higher level of councils in the church we now call the synod. And our presbytery is a part of the Synod of the Covenant, which is made up of presbyteries in Ohio and Michigan, basically. And then, of course, our General Assembly, which oversees the whole Presbyterian Church in our country and in places around the world, is again made up of equal representation from ruling and teaching elders. So when the assembly meets, now every 2 years the assembly meets, that assembly also has a balance between ruling and teaching elders.
Now, does that assembly look at doctrine, or does it look at social outreach and ministry, or does it look at the whole picture in governance of the Presbyterian Church?
Yes to all of those questions. Yeah, and it also struggles to try to figure out increasingly better ways to govern and organize ourselves. This last year, our General Assembly, and then it was ratified by the presbyteries, adopted a new form of government, that is going to give a lot more flexibility to local churches and to presbyteries and synods to determine how they operate. So it's a major shift in the way we even organize ourselves. But of course, the General Assembly also, like you indicated, deals with theological issues. We wrestle with statements of faith or creeds that might be ones that we want to add to our book. We also wrestle with social issues, whether they be issues within our own country or global issues. And again, Presbyterians love to disagree about how we understand God's will for us.
Okay. I'd like to talk briefly, we're getting towards the end of our time together, on two things, the Book of Order and the Book of Confessions. If you could share some insight into those two.
Okay, well, again, I'm hardly an authority about it, Jim, but we Presbyterians like to say we're governed by three books. The Bible, first of all, the Book of Confessions, like you indicated, and then the Book of Order. Our Book of Confessions is made up, now let me think, I think it's 9 statements of faith that we've adopted. They go back to things like the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. There's 4 statements out of the time of the Reformation, and then there's now 3 statements actually that are from the 20th century. The most recent statement adopted was a confession called the Brief Statement of Faith, adopted after the reunion of the northern and southern parts of our Presbyterian family. The Book of Order is basically made up of 3 sections: the form of government, the way we govern ourselves; the directory for worship, which sort of tells us how to direct our worship, prayer life, sacramental life, and so forth; and then the Book of Discipline, which is how we try to resolve problems. Okay, so the Book of Order has those 3 segments to it. Okay. Maybe a lot more than you wanted, but...
No, it's perfect. Okay. I'd like you to mention briefly about the ordination within the Presbyterian community. Okay. You obviously are an ordained minister. Right. Can you share that that function, but also that concept of ordination within the Presbyterian Church?
Okay, again, good question. In the Presbyterian Church, the office of ordination, we'd like to say everybody in the church has a ministry, has a calling, but there are certain callings within the church that are set apart, not because they're any better, but because we think that their ministry is unique and particular, and that's ordination. We ordain deacons, we ordain ruling elders, like I said earlier, and we also now ordain teaching elders, ministers. When the decision about ordination takes place, we always see that it's a 3-party conviction. There needs to be, of course, the individual themselves needs to feel as if they are called to be ordained. Secondly, in the case of a ruling elder in a local congregation, the congregation has to say that they're... And then finally, in the local church, the session, which is the council that rules the local congregation. In terms of ministers, the minister has to feel a sense of call. The presbytery has to feel that this person's called to be ordained. And then there needs to be a congregation or some ministry that confirms that call. So there's kind of a 3-fold confirmation of that sense of ordination.
Well, Nick, we certainly appreciate your presence on our show today.
Great.
We thank you for your insight and input, and
thank you very kindly for the invitation, and thank you for your interest.
Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
The more I search for my significance, seems the more I disappear. And I wonder, have I made a difference in anybody's life since I've been here? But I can hear your laughter, it's the sweetest sound I've ever known. I don't know how love happens, but I know I'm not alone. And I still have faith in you.
Devotion. Pass it on.
Welcome back to our show. We're talking with our friends in the Presbyterian community. And now joining me in the second part of the show is Dan Schomer, who is the General Presbyter of the Eastminster Presbytery. And Dan, it's such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Privileged to be here.
If you could let us know exactly what that means, that you're the General Presbytery of the Eastminster Presbytery.
In the Presbyterian Church, presbyteries have the opportunity, although not the mandate, to include in their staff a person called by a variety of names: general presbyter, executive presbyter, pastor to the presbytery, whose function is to provide oversight administratively, to provide leadership, and to provide pastoral care for pastors.
When we were talking with Pastor Mager earlier in the show, I asked him to define ordination in the Presbyterian Church. Is your role specifically as someone who's ordained or not, or could it be?
To be a general presbyter, one must be ordained either as a teaching elder or a ruling elder.
Okay. And if you could explain a little bit more about the structure in the Presbyterian community and in general, but then also localize it for us.
Well, the real heart of our connectionalism in the Presbyterian Church is the presbytery. We have, I believe, 173 presbyteries in the United States. Presbyteries are comprised of all of the ministers who reside within the bounds, both active and retired. So our membership as teaching elders is in the presbytery, and each church elects from its session one or more ruling elders, depending upon the size of the congregation, to serve together as the presbytery.
Now, the ruling elders, is that a tenured position, or is that something for life?
The role of ruling elder is for life. One may be active or one may be inactive in terms of participation in the session, which is the council or governing body of a local congregation, but the ordination and the identity as a ruling elder is for life. Interestingly enough, to be a teaching elder, one must be functioning in ministry or honorably retired. One cannot be an inactive teaching elder.
When we talk about ministries within the Presbyterian community, can you give us some specifics as to what variety of ministries the Presbyterian Church is all about?
At the local level or at the presbytery level, or both?
If you could do both.
Okay, fine. Local congregations are, of course, are comprised of its members. Those members are, through baptism, called to ministry and included in the community of faith, the people of God. Each member is expected to be growing in his or her personal discipleship as a follower of Jesus Christ, is expected to seek to discern his or her spiritual gifts with the guidance and with the partnership of the congregation, the session, and the pastor. And each member is expected to be a steward of the gifts that one has received from God. That would include the gifts and talents that are provided through the giving of time and the giving of ministry, but it also would include financial stewardship.
You know, when you talk about stewardship, that's really a fundamental part, as I see it, in giving back to God what God has given us.
Yes.
Has stewardship always been a part of the Presbyterian teaching and community, or is that something that's more now practiced?
Stewardship is very much a part of the Reformed tradition. It has been from the beginning. Luther emphasized the priesthood of all believers. Calvin further developed that concept again in terms of the stewardship of life. For that very reason, it's not unusual to find Presbyterian congregations that are heavily involved in environmental issues, because we see it not as a political issue or a scientific issue. We see it instead really as a theological issue. So the care of God's creation is another expression of stewardship.
We also know that the Presbyterian community is very involved in ecumenical outreach and ecumenical experience. Could you share some of your experiences primarily in ecumenism in light of the ecumenical church?
Certainly. I spent 29 years in parish ministry as a parish pastor prior to becoming general presbyter and within this presbytery. So this is really home for me. And from the very beginning of my pastoral ministry, I found many opportunities to work with others within the community where I was serving, which happened to be the New Brighton, Pennsylvania area. What I discovered was that there was a wonderful vitality in the church when we were working with others of other denominational backgrounds, and that there was wonderful community focus. We were able to make a difference in the community when we joined our common concerns, our common prayers, and our common commitments to the community around us. More recently, as I've been in the position of general presbyter, I became familiar with the ministry of the Mahoning Valley Organizing Collaborative. And as Presbyterians tend to be involved just about anywhere you go in ecumenical efforts, so I found that a number of the members of our presbytery, a number of our pastors, and a number of our ruling elders were involved, among them Reverend Mager, and have become more and more involved with that organization. I've become convinced that as the church becomes, as we have faced more and more a sense of disconnect between the people around us in our communities and the church, which unfortunately have been reflected by decreased membership and decreased participation, I have also sensed a calling for the church to become more heavily involved in the communities around it, and that our witness is not simply to be within the confines of our sanctuaries or our facilities, but that our witness, that Christ is calling our witness into the community. And I find the Mahoning Valley Organizing Collaborative a wonderful ecumenical effort that brings me together with people across the theological and denominational spectrum to work for common causes that we believe in deeply and that we believe are an expression of our faith.
You know, you're exactly right, because unless we're in this together, then it seems that things don't really get done. But if we work together, not only in an ecumenical spirit, but also in a collaborative effort to meet the needs of the people around us, and thereby build up our own local communities, then why be involved with it at all, really?
And I think that one of the theological rationales for this, Calvin sought to make Geneva the city of God. He believed that faith should express itself in the way in which we form community. And I find something very similar happening today in many of the ecumenical efforts, where the emphasis is not so much upon helping the institutional church to grow, but to seek to bring to fruition the kingdom of God. And in reality, people who are calling themselves spiritual today are often having difficulty understanding why the institutional church. I think it's our responsibility as Presbyterians, as Roman Catholics, as the ecumenical Christian community to demonstrate why the institutional church.
I totally agree with you. When you're talking about some of the collaborative efforts of ecumenism, what are some of those specific outreaches and ministries that are done collaboratively within the community?
Well, within the Mahoning Valley, one of the issues that we became aware of is human trafficking. And it is such a horrendous situation that I think it has drawn the passions of a very broad spectrum of the Christian community. And this is especially a problem in the Warren area. We have focused upon food justice. And curiously enough, one of our Presbyterian churches, one of the 53 churches in Eastminster Presbytery, is Common Ground, which has a nonprofit that it's developed called Goodness Grows, and it is working in the area of food justice, working in the area of the community gardens that are forming in Youngstown, providing not only green space but productive green space. Mahoning Valley Organizing Collaborative, again through an ecumenical effort, has been approaching local grocers and saying, we have a food desert here in the Mahoning Valley, especially in the urban areas. People aren't able to get food. They aren't able to get fresh fruits and vegetables, healthy foods, and helping to convince local grocers to bring in local produce. So these are examples of the kinds of ministries that are being undertaken ecumenically with strong support from Presbyterians.
We have about 2 minutes left with our time together. If there's folks that are with us that are Presbyterian or Roman Catholic or Lutheran, whatever, what can they do, or what insight can you give them to be involved not only in their local church, but also in this local collaborative to reach out and to minister to those people that are unfortunately less fortunate than ourselves?
I think the key is get together, have lunch together, share your hopes and dreams for your community, speak your heart, reflect on what has motivated you to be involved in ministry. We have one of our congregations happens to be the Wycliffe Presbyterian Church, and the pastor there, the Reverend Elmarie Parker, has been working diligently with those of other denominations in the Wycliffe area of Austintown, and some wonderful ministries are evolving. They are working with the local schools to provide for the needs of the children during the year when school is not in session, to make sure they're getting good, healthy food through the summer. So I think the key is we have to get together. We have to get to know our communities. We need to get involved in our communities and then begin to work with the community, not do ministry at them, but with them. And the Holy Spirit will bear fruit.
Well, Dan, we certainly appreciate your presence on our show today, and God bless you in your ministry and in your work.
And you also. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
The Church at Home has been a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.